I've always been the type of person who prefers the calm of the night to work. My name is Jake, and for 3 years, I've been driving for a rideshare app here in rural Pennsylvania. On that particular night in July, the cold was biting, and the snow was falling softly. A rare occurrence, but enough to make the roads treacherous. My last ride had been in the city, taking an elderly lady to her daughter's house, and now I was heading back home, driving along a rural highway that cut through a deserted stretch between 2 small towns. My car, an old 2008 Corolla, creaked with every turn but had always been reliable. On the nearly empty road, my headlights were the only thing illuminating the worn asphalt and the trees swaying in the cold wind. That's when I saw something up ahead, blinking in the darkness. Hazard lights. A car was stopped on the shoulder. At that moment, my head told me to keep driving. After all, how many strange stories have you heard about stopping at night? But my sense of duty got the better of me. What if it was someone truly in need? I slowed down as I analyzed the scene. A gray sedan, partially covered in snow, and a figure in a black jacket, raising a hand in the universal gesture for help. Something made me hesitate, but I stopped the car a few meters away. I left the engine running and got out of the car, feeling the cold cut my face like glass. The figure in the black jacket started walking toward me. It was a tall man with a hood covering part of his face, but I could see he was sweating, which struck me as odd considering the freezing weather. "Thanks for stopping," he said, his voice low and raspy. "My car broke down. I think it's the battery." I looked at the sedan while he spoke, trying to figure out what was wrong, but something seemed off. "Is that your car?" I asked, just to make conversation. He hesitated for a second. "Yeah, it is. It's a Honda, I think. Or maybe a Toyota. Not sure about the model." Alarms went off in my head. Who doesn't know the model of their own car? I pulled out my phone to offer to call a tow truck, but he quickly raised his hand, almost as if trying to stop me. "No need. I just need a push to the main road," he said. The way he spoke made me tense, like he had rehearsed those words. My eyes went back to the car, and I noticed something that sent chills down my spine. The seats were covered in thick plastic. It didn't seem normal. "Sorry, but I don't think I can help," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady as I backed away to my car. The man said nothing. He just stood there, staring at me, as I climbed back into the driver's seat with my heart pounding. As soon as I got into the car and locked the doors, he started walking toward me again, this time with quick, determined steps. I turned the engine on and reversed so fast that I nearly skidded off the snowy shoulder. When I got back onto the road, he was standing in the middle of it, staring at me like he knew something I didn't. My heart felt like it was trying to escape through my throat. I sped away, but I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror. The sedan's hazard lights still blinked in the darkness, but he was no longer there. I only felt relieved when, for a few minutes, the road behind me was completely empty. That's when everything changed. First, I saw 2 headlights appear in the distance in the rearview mirror. At first I thought it was just another car, but as the lights got closer, I realized it was the same sedan. It was coming fast, very fast. "No, it can't be him," I muttered to myself, trying to find a logical explanation. But as it got close enough for me to see the outline of the car, there was no doubt. It was him. The first thing that crossed my mind was that maybe he was angry because I hadn't helped, but something about the situation told me it was much more than that. I pressed the gas, trying to create distance, but the sedan kept coming, getting closer and closer, almost tailgating me. Every curve in the road seemed to bring him closer. His headlights flashed persistently, and he made aggressive maneuvers as if trying to force me to stop. My hands were gripping the wheel so tightly they hurt, and I was sweating despite the heater being on. I remembered my phone on the dashboard and tried to grab it to call the police, but my nervousness made it slip from my fingers and fall onto the passenger side floor. "Damn it!" I yelled, too afraid to take my eyes off the road to retrieve it. It felt like every wrong move would be an opportunity for him to catch me. Then he started swerving his car, threatening to hit the side of mine. The sound of tires skidding on snow and the roaring engines echoed through the deserted road, creating a terrifying soundtrack for what felt like a life-or-death game. My heart raced every time he got closer, and the only thing I could think of was finding some way out, somewhere I could call for help. But the road seemed endless, just snow, trees, and darkness. I floored the gas, but my old Corolla was no match for the sedan. He stayed right there, glued to me, like a predator ready to strike. At one point, I noticed something peculiar. The sedan wasn't trying to overtake me or actually hit me. It was as if he was just playing with me, testing how far I could go. That scared me even more. Who does that? Why didn't he just end it if that was his goal? My mind raced in 1,000 directions, trying to remember if I had passed a gas station or a turnoff before taking this road. But there was nothing. It was just a rural stretch, unlit and seemingly endless. The car behind me felt like an extension of the darkness, chasing me relentlessly. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I saw a small miracle ahead, an entrance to what looked like a rest area, though completely deserted. Without thinking twice, I made a sharp turn, the tires sliding on the snow as I tried to escape the sedan. I parked behind an old structure, probably an abandoned restroom. I turned off the lights and engine, trying to control my breathing as the absolute silence swallowed everything around me. For a moment, I thought I had lost him. But then, I saw the headlights appear at the entrance of the rest area, sweeping across the place like hungry eyes searching for their prey. I crouched in the driver's seat, practically curling up to avoid being seen. The silence was so intense that I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The sedan moved slowly through the rest area, its headlights illuminating every corner. They swept past nearby trees, rusted signs, and, for a brief moment, over my car. I held my breath, convincing myself that he hadn't noticed. But then, the lights stopped. He knew I was there. I heard the engine purring softly as the car came to a stop, followed by the sound of a door opening. I wanted to run, but my legs felt glued in place. All I could do was sit there, paralyzed, waiting for the worst. The figure stepped out of the sedan, walking slowly, almost as if savoring the moment. He had something in his hand, but it was too dark to make out what it was. My body moved instinctively when I heard footsteps getting closer. I unlocked the passenger door and slipped out on the opposite side, hiding behind a pile of dirty snow. The wind was cutting into my skin, and the intense cold threatened to pull me into unconsciousness. I tried to peek over my shoulder but only saw the sedan's lights and his silhouette, motionless, as if he was listening for something in the air. For a moment I thought he might have given up, that maybe he wasn't sure where I was. But then I heard a sound that froze my blood. The metallic clink of a pipe being dragged through the snow. He was tapping the end against the ground, a sharp, rhythmic sound that echoed in every direction. My chest felt so tight that I could barely breathe. I started crawling, trying to make it to a small wooden fence that bordered the area. With every movement, the sound of his footsteps grew louder, and I knew he was getting closer. I still couldn't understand the reason behind all this. What did he want from me? When I reached the fence, I forced my body over it, even though my muscles were frozen stiff from the cold and terror. On the other side, there was a narrow trail leading into the trees, and I started running without looking back. The air felt solid in my lungs, and the snow made every step a struggle, but all I could think about was escaping. The clinking sound suddenly stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent again. That's when I realized he had followed me into the woods. I could hear his heavy breathing somewhere to my left, and even though I couldn't see him, I felt like he knew exactly where I was. The forest seemed to close in around me, the branches of the trees blocking out the moonlight and making everything even more claustrophobic. Every sound was amplified. The crunch of snow under my feet, the snap of dry branches, even the uneven rhythm of my breathing. I knew he was close, but I couldn't see him. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, like something falling, and I stopped instinctively, trying to hide behind a large tree trunk. That's when I saw his shadow moving slowly among the trees. He wasn't in a hurry, which made it even more unsettling. I had to think fast. If I kept running, he would eventually catch me. So I started scanning for anything I could use to my advantage. My eyes landed on a thick piece of wood, partially buried in the snow. I picked it up, trying not to make any noise, and positioned myself behind the tree, waiting for the right moment. My entire body was trembling, and I could barely hold on to the wood, but I knew I didn't have any other choice. The footsteps grew louder, and then I saw him. He walked right past me, just a few meters away, his tall, shadowy figure contrasting against the snow. It was my chance. With all the strength I could muster, I stepped out from my hiding spot and struck him in the back with the piece of wood. He fell forward, but he didn't drop what he was holding. Now I could see it clearly. It was a pipe. Without waiting to see his reaction, I started running back toward the road, my mind spinning in pure survival mode. I heard a scream behind me, a guttural sound that didn't seem human, and that made me run even faster. When I finally reached the shoulder of the road, I saw the lights of my car in the distance. The sight gave me an extra burst of energy, and I sprinted like never before, throwing myself into the car and locking the doors in one swift motion. I turned the key with trembling hands, and the engine took a second that felt like an eternity to start. When the headlights illuminated the road, I looked back and saw nothing. My heart was still pounding as I sped away from there as fast as I could. I drove straight to the nearest police station, but when the officers went to the location I described, they found no sedan, no signs of a struggle in the snow, nothing. To this day, I don't know who or what chased me that night, but one thing is certain. I've never taken a night shift on that route again, and I always avoid stopping on the road no matter what. House sitting was never something I imagined doing, but at that time it made sense. I was 24, unemployed, and my neighbor Mike needed someone to take care of his house while he was away on a business trip for 2 weeks. His house was in a more secluded area, on the edge of a snow-covered forest, about a 10-minute walk from mine. It was an old, classic country house, dark wooden walls, large windows with heavy curtains, and an attic he used as an office. I agreed to help for a simple reason: easy money and some peace and quiet. Plus, the idea of spending a few days in the silence of the countryside, surrounded by snow, seemed almost therapeutic. The first few days were exactly what I expected. The house had an eerie, almost paralyzing calm. I spent my time binge-watching shows, reading a book I'd been putting off for months, and enjoying the view. Everything seemed perfect until the third night, when something changed. It was late, maybe around 2 a.m. I was on the couch, fighting off sleep, when I heard a subtle noise, a scratching sound coming from the living room window. At first I thought it was the wind or a branch brushing against the glass. I got up, half asleep, to check. When I pulled the curtain aside, there was nothing there. Just my own reflection in the glass and the moonlight illuminating the snow outside. That's when I noticed the footprints on the porch. Muddy footprints, perfectly defined, leading toward the door. I froze for a few seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. Muddy footprints in the middle of winter, when everything was covered in snow. It didn't make sense. I grabbed the flashlight Mike had left by the door and carefully stepped outside. The beam of light followed the trail toward the edge of the forest, but the footprints just stopped there, as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. I quickly shut the door, locking it twice, and checked all the windows. Everything was closed and latched, just as I had left it. I convinced myself it had to be a lost traveler or maybe an animal. It couldn't be anything else. The next day, I tried to brush it off. I played music to drown out the silence and forced myself to keep a normal routine. During the day, the house felt more welcoming, almost friendly, but as night fell, the atmosphere shifted. That night, I noticed something that made my stomach churn. When I went up to the guest bedroom to sleep, the attic door was slightly ajar. I was certain I had left it closed the day before. A chill ran down my spine as I climbed the stairs slowly, trying to catch any sound from up there. "It's just the wind or a draft," I told myself. But as I got closer, I noticed something odd. A faint mark in the dust on the floor, as if something heavy had been dragged through the hallway. My first instinct was to go straight to the attic and check. Each step on the creaky stairs amplified my tension. Up there, everything seemed in its place. Mike's makeshift office was small, with a sturdy wooden desk, an old computer, and a shelf full of dusty books. But something stood out. One of the books was open on the desk, with a sheet of paper scribbled with notes beside it. I didn't remember seeing it there before. I leaned in closer, and under the weak beam of my flashlight, I could make out a few words on the paper, sketches and random numbers, as if someone had been trying to solve a puzzle. A strange smell filled the air, something like old wood mixed with mold, and suddenly I felt an overwhelming discomfort. I rushed out, slamming the door shut behind me, as if that could keep whatever it was contained. The next morning, I called Mike. I explained the footprints, the noises, and what I'd found in the attic, hoping he'd have an explanation. But he laughed, saying I was letting my imagination run wild because of the isolation. "The house makes noises, you know. It's old," he said casually, which only irritated me more. I didn't push, but deep down, I knew something was off. During the day, everything seemed calm, but I couldn't relax. I paced back and forth, feeling like I was being watched. Small details began to bother me. A light I was sure I'd turned off was on again. A glass I left in the kitchen appeared in the bathroom, and even my bag looked like it had been moved. It felt like the house was alive, playing tricks on me. On the fifth night, things got even stranger. It was past midnight when I heard a sound coming from the hallway, light, shuffling footsteps. I didn't have the courage to leave the room right away. I sat on the bed, clutching my phone like it was a weapon, waiting for the sound to go away. When I finally worked up the nerve to open the door, the hallway was dark and silent. But on the floor, I saw something that made my heart race. Muddy footprints, just like the ones on the porch. They led from the entrance of the house to the attic. I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm, and went back to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. I stayed awake the rest of the night, listening to every creak and groan of the house. The next day, I decided I wasn't spending another night there without answers. I grabbed the spare key and went back to the attic during daylight, when the sun streamed through the small, dusty windows. I searched every corner, opening boxes and checking behind furniture, but everything seemed normal. It wasn't until I was about to leave that I noticed something strange on the ceiling, near the light fixture. A small hatch I hadn't seen before. I grabbed a chair and climbed up to take a closer look. Inside, there was a tiny compartment, and inside that, I found something that left me speechless. An old, rusted key, and a notebook filled with handwritten pages. The notes were in an almost illegible scrawl, but a few words stood out. Hidden, watch, and don't trust. Hi. That was enough for me to decide that night would be my last in the house. That night I was overwhelmed by a mix of fear and determination. I couldn't stop thinking about the notebook and what those words might mean. Did Mike know about this? Was he hiding something? Questions swirled in my head, but I knew I had to keep calm until morning. To be safe, I locked all the doors and windows again and placed a chair against the bedroom door. I was exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. Every sound the house made seemed amplified, as if it was trying to drive me insane. Around 3 in the morning, the noise returned. Footsteps, this time louder, closer. They didn't stop, moving up and down the stairs, back and forth in the hallway. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore them, but then I heard something that froze my blood. The sound of someone turning the doorknob to my room. This couldn't be real. I gripped my phone tightly, ready to call the police, but the doorknob stopped moving. For a few minutes, there was an eerie silence, and I began to question if I was imagining everything. Then, something heavy hit the door, hard enough to make the chair shake. This time, I didn't wait to find out what it was. I grabbed my backpack, opened the bedroom window and jumped out, landing in the snow outside. The biting cold and adrenaline made me run as fast as I could, not daring to look back, until I reached my house. I locked the door, took a deep breath, and called Mike, demanding answers. He stayed silent for a few seconds before saying, "I didn't want to scare you, but I've had similar experiences. That's why I asked you to watch the house, to see if it would happen again." After that call, my mind was racing. What did he mean by, "see if it would happen again"? I pressed him for more details, but Mike seemed reluctant to explain. All he said was, "Don't worry, I'll be back tomorrow, and we can talk in person." That answer only made me more suspicious. I spent the rest of the night locked in my house, unable to sleep, with all the lights on. The snow outside felt heavier, muffling every sound, and every little creak or movement I thought I heard made my heart race. The next morning, Mike showed up at my door, looking as tired as I felt. He was carrying a small box full of old documents, which he placed on my kitchen table. "I've never told anyone this, but the house has a strange history," he began, lighting a cigarette with shaky hands. "The previous owner disappeared, left everything behind, even his shoes by the door. When I bought the house, I didn't think much of it, but after a while, things started happening." He pointed to the box and asked me to open it. Inside were old photos of the house and more notebooks, similar to the one I had found in the attic. The notes mentioned noises, footprints, and even the feeling of being watched. I thought I was going crazy, but now you've seen it too. That means it's not just me, he said, almost sounding relieved. The key you found? It's for a basement, hidden under the attic floor. I've never had the courage to open it. I knew the right thing to do was to walk away and let Mike deal with his own house, but my curiosity got the better of me. We went back to the attic together, and he showed me the exact spot on the floor where the hidden compartment was. With the rusted key in hand, he gave me a hesitant look, as if hoping I'd back out. But I insisted, turning the key in the lock with difficulty until I heard a click. The basement revealed itself as a cramped, almost claustrophobic space with stairs leading down into thick darkness. The air down there was heavy, carrying a damp, sour smell, as if something had been rotting there for decades. At the bottom of the basement, we found a small room filled with old things, furniture covered in dust, yellowed photographs, and more footprints. These made of dried mud, circling the space. But what truly caught our attention was a large chest, wrapped in chains. Mike hesitated, but I, driven by a mix of adrenaline and fear, used a crowbar we found to open it. Inside was a collection of objects that made no sense. Faceless dolls, broken clocks, and at the bottom, a mirror covered with a black cloth. When I pulled the cloth away, a chill ran through my entire body. My reflection looked normal at first, but then it blinked, something I definitely hadn't done. Mike screamed at me to cover the mirror again, and I obeyed, my hands shaking. He grabbed my arm, pulling me out of the basement. We ran back up, locked the attic, and decided never to open that basement again. This house isn't normal. Maybe it never was, he said, extinguishing his cigarette forcefully in the ashtray. Since then, I've never gone back. Mike put the house up for sale a few weeks later, and to this day, no one knows who bought it, or if anyone actually lives there now. I don't know what that thing in the mirror was, and honestly, I'd rather not find out. I moved into this neighborhood about 3 months ago, right at the start of winter. It was a quiet place, the kind you only see on Christmas cards. Houses with snow-covered roofs, silent streets, and an air of peace that made it seem like nothing bad could ever happen there. I had just gone through a messy divorce and was trying to start over, so finding an affordable house in that neighborhood felt like a sign that things were finally looking up. At first, I admit the idea of spending so much time alone scared me, but I quickly became friends with my neighbor, Tom. He was a guy in his 50s, with messy gray hair and an easy smile. Whenever we chatted about trivial things, the weather, problems with the heating, or the black cat that always wandered onto our porches, he seemed genuinely happy to have someone to share his solitude with. Everything seemed normal until that night, about a week ago. I was in my living room, reading some random book, when I noticed something strange through the gap in my curtains. The lights in Tom's house were flickering erratically, as if someone was playing with the switch. I glanced at the clock, 10:37 p.m. It bothered me. Tom had mentioned in one of our conversations that he usually went to bed early because he worked from home in the mornings. I grabbed my phone and called him, but there was no answer. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should check on him, but the icy wind outside and the thought of seeming nosy made me stay put. I decided I'd talk to him the next day. Little did I know, there wouldn't be a next day for our conversations. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of unease, like a gut feeling I couldn't shake. While having my coffee, I looked out the window and noticed something that made me uneasy. The snow around Tom's house was untouched, no footprints or signs of movement. That was odd, since he always stepped out to grab the newspaper or at least shovel the snow off his porch. I decided to stop by and check if everything was okay. I rang the doorbell, waited, and got no answer. I knocked on the door, but the sound echoed emptily, as if the house were unoccupied. Through the living room window, with the curtains slightly open, I could see furniture out of place and boxes scattered on the floor. None of it made sense. He'd never mentioned plans to move. Deep down, something told me I shouldn't go inside, but the back door was ajar, and curiosity got the better of me. When I pushed it open, I was greeted by a suffocating silence. The house was empty. What struck me the most was its state. Personal belongings were scattered as if he'd left in a hurry. I found his landline phone on the floor, its cord unplugged, and a chair knocked over in the kitchen. On the table was a mug still filled with coffee, now cold. I left with a knot in my stomach, feeling a mix of guilt and unease. I called the police, but all they did was register it as a missing person case. To them, it wasn't unusual. Adults sometimes just vanish on their own. But I knew there was more to this story. In the days that followed, I couldn't get Tom's house out of my head. Every time I passed by his window, I felt an almost tangible sense of emptiness, like something invisible was watching me from inside. Then, on the third night after his disappearance, I received the first strange message. It was a text on my phone from an unknown number. Just 2 words. "Do you remember?" It sent chills down my spine. I replied with a simple, "Who is this?" but got no response. I spent the rest of the night trying to convince myself it was just someone playing a prank. But the messages kept coming, always short, always cryptic. "Check the basement," or "You saw enough." One of them said, "He trusted you." I couldn't understand what they meant, but every time a message arrived, the air around me felt heavier. I tried blocking the number, but the messages kept appearing, always from different numbers. The worst part happened when, one night, I received a photo. It was of my porch, taken from somewhere on the street. The image was blurry, but you could clearly see the silhouette of someone standing there. It felt like whoever was behind this wanted to remind me I was being watched. For the first time in a long while, I closed all the curtains and locked every door in the house before trying to sleep. My routine completely fell apart after that. I avoided leaving the house unless it was absolutely necessary, and even then, I felt like I was being followed. The paranoia started consuming me. I went back to Tom's house, convinced I needed to investigate further, especially because of the message about the basement. I grabbed a flashlight and entered through the back door again. Even though I was familiar with the layout of the house, going in a second time was even more terrifying. The smell of dampness was stronger, as if the house had been sealed for decades, and the silence was suffocating. I made my way to the basement door, and with trembling hands, turned the knob. To my surprise, it was locked. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Deep scratch marks around the door frame, as if someone had desperately tried to open it, or maybe escape. I went back home even more confused than before. I tried not to think about it too much, but that same night I got another message. "You should have tried harder." The combination of those words and what I'd seen on that door completely robbed me of sleep. I decided I needed help, so I told my closest friend, Mark, everything. He was skeptical at first but agreed to come back with me to Tom's house the next day. I felt relieved that I wouldn't have to face it alone, but little did I know, things were about to get even darker. The next day Mark showed up early, bringing a crowbar and a backpack with some tools. He didn't say much as we walked through the snow toward Tom's house, but I noticed he seemed uneasy, constantly glancing over his shoulder. When we arrived, the air felt colder than usual, as if the house had its own atmosphere. We entered through the same back entrance, and Mark went straight to the basement door. While he examined the scratch marks on the wood, I felt an increasing discomfort, almost like we were being watched. He finally managed to force the lock, and with a loud creak, the door opened, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The smell that came from below was indescribable. It wasn't just dampness, it was something more rotten. Mark went down first, lighting the way with his flashlight. I hesitated for a moment before following, my heart pounding in my chest. The basement was larger than I expected, with walls lined with shelves full of old boxes. But what caught our attention was a table in the center of the room. On it was a pile of photographs scattered around. I picked one up with trembling hands, and my blood ran cold. It was a photo of me, taken outside my house, from the same angle as the one I had received on my phone. Mark grabbed another photo and showed it to me. It was of Tom standing at the basement door, looking at something behind the camera. The feeling that we weren't alone became impossible to ignore. Mark and I exchanged glances, unsure of what to do. He began rummaging through the shelves while I tried to make sense of the photos. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. On one of the basement walls, there were handprints, as if someone had pressed their fingers into the wet cement. Some were small, others larger, but all seemed desperate. "Man, this isn't right. We should leave," Mark muttered, holding an old black notebook he'd found in one of the boxes. He started flipping through it, and it quickly became clear it was a journal. The entries were frantic, alternating between confessions and pleas. "They're watching me," one page read. "I can't trust anyone, not even you." Suddenly we heard a noise coming from upstairs. It was low but distinct, like shuffling footsteps on the wooden floor. We froze, exchanging looks as we tried to listen more closely. "Is someone here?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. Of course no one answered. He turned off the flashlight and whispered, "We need to get out. Now." But before we could make a move, something fell off a shelf behind us, crashing loudly. It was a box filled with VHS tapes. One of them had my name written on it in shaky handwriting. I held it carefully, trying to ignore the growing panic. "This is too much, man. We can't ignore this," Mark said, pulling my arm. I knew he was right, but something inside me told me I had to understand what was happening, even if it cost me my sanity. We returned to my house in silence, both too shaken to talk about what we'd found. As soon as we got inside, Mark placed the notebook and the VHS tape on the living room table. He looked at me seriously and said, "Do you have a VCR here? Because I'm not sleeping until we know what's on this tape." I grabbed the player from the back of a closet and hooked it up to the TV. My hands trembled as I loaded the tape. The screen was static for a few seconds, then a grainy image appeared. It was a recording from inside Tom's house, seemingly from a bedroom. The video showed the basement door closed while someone, likely Tom, murmured something inaudible in the background. Suddenly, the door began to move on its own, slowly opening. The camera shook, as if Tom was backing away. What happened next was so quick we barely processed it. A dark, shapeless figure emerged from the basement, moving toward the camera. The tape went static again, but the sound continued. It was a low, guttural noise, followed by something that sounded like a muffled scream. Mark immediately turned off the VCR, visibly shaken. "This is too much. That guy was dealing with something not human," he said, his voice almost a whisper. I wanted to respond, but my throat was dry. Deep down, I knew he was right. But what scared me most was the last message I received on my phone, moments before we played the tape. "You've seen enough." Mark insisted we take the notebook and the tape to the police. However, something told me it wouldn't solve anything. This wasn't the kind of thing a formal investigation could explain. Still, I agreed, and the next day we went to the local station. The officer who attended us seemed more interested in ending his shift than in hearing our story. He took the notebook and the tape, promising to investigate, but the look on his face said otherwise. When we left, Mark seemed relieved, but I felt exposed, like we had made a mistake handing over that evidence. My instincts were right. That night, I received another message. "You shouldn't have done that." The dread hit me like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't just the content of the message, but the fact that it came with a photo. It was the VHS tape, now burned beyond recognition, tossed into the snow in front of my house. That was a clear warning, and Mark agreed. "This isn't going to stop, man. You need to get out of here," he said. That's exactly what I did. Within a week, I packed up my things and left that neighborhood without looking back. But even now, months later, the messages haven't completely stopped. Sometimes I still get short texts, unexplained, just to remind me that what happened there is still with me. The last message I received said, "You'll never forget," and it was right. I've always been an ordinary guy. My name is Jack, I'm 36 years old, and I'm a single father to Emily, who's 7. We live in a small apartment in a modest building, the kind where you know all your neighbors by name, or at least you think you do. My routine was always the same. Drop Emily off at school, work at the office until 5, and then pick her up. Evenings were ours, dinner, homework, and, if she behaved, a cartoon episode before bed. But everything changed on a random Tuesday. It was late October, that time of year when the air starts to chill and the nights seem to creep in earlier. That was the day I found the package. It was sitting right in front of my door. No return address, no label, just my name scrawled in thick black ink. I don't usually receive packages, so it struck me as odd, but I didn't think much of it. Emily was already asleep, and the TV murmured in the background, filling the silence of our apartment. I picked up the package, brought it inside, and sat at the kitchen table to open it. There was no bubble wrap or padding, just a pile of loose photos, slightly bent as if they'd been shoved inside hastily. The first one I pulled out was of Emily and me at the park, taken from a distance but clearly us. At first I thought it might be a surprise gift from a friend or relative, but then I picked up the second photo. It was the entrance to Emily's school. Then the third, which sent a chill down my spine. It was of us sitting on the couch in our living room, the curtain at the window slightly parted. My heart started racing. This wasn't a gift. It was a warning. By then I was on edge, my stomach twisting like I'd swallowed a stone. I kept sifting through the package, and each photo I pulled out was worse than the last. One showed Emily playing in the schoolyard. Another was of me carrying grocery bags. And then came the worst of them all. A photo taken inside Emily's bedroom. She was asleep, the dim light from the hallway casting a faint glow on her face. The idea that someone had been inside our home while we were there, sleeping, made my skin crawl. I jumped up and started checking every door and window in the apartment, locking and unlocking each one, as if that could somehow undo what had already happened. I tried to think rationally, but my mind was a mess. Who would do this? And why? I thought about calling the police, but I hesitated, afraid they'd dismiss it as a prank. After all, there was no direct threat, just an ominous invasion of privacy. But the angles of the photos made it clear. Whoever took them knew exactly where to position themselves to capture the perfect shots. It felt like a predator watching its prey. I grabbed my phone and tried to analyze the photo metadata, but whoever did this had wiped any digital traces. There were no fingerprints, no identifying marks on the package, just an oppressive feeling that I was being watched, even as I sat there. I couldn't sleep that night. I spent hours sitting on the couch, staring at the door, with every light in the apartment on. Every sound in the building, a neighbor opening a door, the elevator humming, even the distant bark of a dog, sent my heart racing. All I could think about was who might be behind this. It was someone who knew our habits, where Emily went to school, where we played, and even where we slept. When morning finally came, I was exhausted, but I still took Emily to school, trying to act as normal as possible. I didn't want to scare her, but I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder as we crossed the street. At work, I could barely concentrate. My mind kept returning to the package and the photos. I confided in a co-worker I trusted, but he just laughed, saying it was probably some sick joke. "Just a nosy neighbor trying to freak you out," he said. But his words did nothing to calm me. When I got home with Emily that evening, I tried to stick to our normal routine, but every movement in the apartment felt weighted with tension. That's when I noticed something that sent a fresh wave of fear through me. In the corner of the living room, near the window, the carpet was slightly indented. It was subtle, but I was sure it hadn't been like that before. Someone had been there, recently, and I hadn't even noticed. That night, after putting Emily to bed, I worked up the courage to take a closer look around the apartment. I grabbed a flashlight and started with the smaller rooms, checking corners and spots that I usually overlooked. I opened the hallway closet, moved boxes, and searched for anything that might give me a clue. Everything seemed normal until I got to Emily's room. The moment I stepped inside, something felt off. The air was heavier, as if the room itself was warning me. The first thing I noticed was the window. It was closed, but the latch was slightly loose, as if someone had tampered with it. My heart started pounding. I sat on her bed for a moment to collect myself when something on the floor caught my eye. It was a folded piece of paper tucked partially under the rug. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. Slowly I unfolded it, almost afraid of what I might find. It wasn't like the other photos. It was something different. The picture showed Emily's crib from when she was a baby, but the detail that terrified me was the reflection in the mirror in the background. A blurry silhouette was visible, too distorted to make out any features. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but the outline was enough to send a shiver down my spine. I remembered that mirror. It had been stored away in the building's storage room for years. How and why was it in this photo? That's when I realized this wasn't just an invasion of privacy. It was personal. Someone had been watching us for much longer than I could comprehend. I was at my breaking point, but I didn't want Emily to sense how shaken I was. The next morning, I came up with an excuse to keep her home from school and stayed with her. My plan was to monitor everything. I kept all the curtains drawn and watched through the tiniest gap, looking for anything unusual in the hallway or outside. Around 2 p.m., I heard something scraping against the front door. My body froze. I ran to the peephole and looked out, but the hallway was empty. When I opened the door, there it was. Another photo. This one was from the same angle as the one taken inside Emily's room, but this time, it was in broad daylight. At this point, I knew I wasn't dealing with just anyone. My patience snapped. I called the police, explained the situation, and 2 officers came to my apartment. They examined the photos, checked the building, and even questioned a few neighbors, but they found nothing suspicious. One of them tried to reassure me, saying they'd increase patrols in the area, but it was clear they didn't take me seriously. When they left, I felt even more vulnerable. That night I locked every door and window and barricaded them with chairs. I didn't know what else to do, but I was certain that whoever was doing this wouldn't stop anytime soon. That night, something happened that changed everything. I was lying on the couch, trying to keep my eyes open while the TV murmured softly in the background. Around 3 a.m., I heard a muffled sound coming from Emily's room. It was a faint creak, followed by what sounded like shuffling footsteps. My body froze. I held my breath, trying to listen more closely. I grabbed a kitchen knife, the only thing I could think of for protection, and crept toward the hallway. When I opened her door, my heart nearly stopped. Emily was sound asleep, but her window was wide open. The wind blew the curtains gently, and on the floor near her bed was another piece of paper. My palms were sweating as I bent down to pick it up. This time it wasn't a photo. It was a message written in large, messy letters. You can't protect her forever. A cold wave of terror washed over me. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was a direct threat. I slammed the window shut, locked it, and spent the rest of the night sitting by her bed, clutching the knife so tightly that my fingers went numb. The threat wasn't against me. It was against her. That terrified me more than anything else. I knew I had to do something before it was too late. The next day I decided to take drastic action. I spoke with the building manager and asked to check the security cameras. To my frustration and disbelief, I found out the system had been down for weeks, due to a technical issue no one had bothered to fix. I felt like I was fighting an invisible enemy alone. I decided to change all the locks on the apartment and installed additional latches on the windows. I also arranged for Emily to stay with my mom, who lived in another town, while I tried to deal with whatever this was. It was the only way I could be sure she'd be safe. That night, after dropping Emily off at my mom's house, I returned to the empty apartment. The silence was oppressive. Every tiny sound seemed magnified, as if the space itself was warning me. Around midnight I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, like someone wanted to be heard. I grabbed my phone and stood by the door, peeking through the peephole. A shadow stood perfectly still, right in front of my door. My heart pounded in my chest, but I mustered the courage to shout, "Who's there? What do you want?" There was no response. Suddenly, the shadow moved, too quickly for me to make out anything. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty again, but there was something new on the floor. Another package. My hand shook as I picked it up. It was smaller than the first, but felt heavier. I went inside, locked the door with all the latches, and sat on the living room floor to open it. Inside I found a small electronic device, a hidden camera. My stomach churned when I realized it had been inside my apartment. Next to the camera was a short note written in childlike scrawl. "Did you think I wasn't here?" My entire body froze. The camera seemed like one of those discreet ones hidden in everyday objects, and the thought of someone watching us for so long made my vision blur for a moment. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. That's when I made my decision. The next day, I told the landlord I was breaking the lease. Within a week, Emily and I were living at my mom's house while I searched for a new place to start fresh. To this day, I still don't know who did it or why. There have been no more notes, photos, or shadows since we moved, but I still wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like I'm being watched. Every time I look out the window or open the door, I brace myself, expecting to find something. A reminder that no matter how far I've run, whoever it was might still be out there, waiting for the right moment to return.